June 3rd, 2025, 4:44 in the morning. At the bottom of the Kerch Strait, Ukrainian agents spent months doing something that no one should be able to do. They planted bombs under Russia's most heavily guarded bridge. That bridge cost nearly $4 billion. The bridge that Putin himself inaugurated by driving a truck. And when the detonator was triggered, 1,100 kilos of TNT exploded over the support pillars. But if you think that was the big part of the story, you still haven't understood what's going on, because that explosion was just one piece. A small piece of a much bigger plan that's been in the works for years. And now, in 2026, it's finally reaching its final stage. Ukraine is doing something in Crimea that nobody thought was possible. And Putin knows this, but he can't stop it anymore. The question is, how? How is a country with hardly any navy defeating one of the world's strongest fleets? And why can't Putin, with his entire army, fight back anymore? The answer is more unsettling than you might think. To understand what's happening now, you need to go back 12 years. February of 2014. Vladimir Putin takes advantage of a moment of political chaos in Kiev. He sends unmarked troops to Crimea in less than 4 weeks. He takes the entire peninsula almost without firing a shot. Putin said that was the greatest achievement of his administration. He said that Crimea was sacred land, that it was an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Black Sea. And he was right about one thing. Crimea is not just any piece of land. It's from there that Russia controls the entire Black Sea. It's from Sevastopol, Russia's main naval base in Crimea, that the Russian fleet sets out. It's from Crimea that the missiles are launched that fall on Kiev, on Odessa, on Mykolaiv, and there's more. At the bottom of the Black Sea, in waters that used to belong to Ukraine, in 2014, there are natural gas reserves valued at hundreds of billions of dollars. When Putin took Crimea, he didn't just take a piece of land. He took 80% of the Black Sea's energy reserves, which belong to Ukraine. The truth is, whoever controls Crimea controls half the war. That's why, when the full-scale invasion began in 2022, Crimea became the base for everything. Troops, ammunition, fuel, missiles, everything went through there. But what Putin didn't imagine was that Ukraine was watching, studying, waiting, and preparing something that would take Russia years to understand. The first clue appeared a few months after the full-scale invasion. In 2022, Ukrainian drones began to appear over Sevastopol. Small, cheap, almost improvised. They would hit a ship here, a base there. The Russians called them isolated incidents. The world press barely reported it. But the attacks didn't stop. In 2023, Ukraine did something unprecedented. An operation that it called the Crab Trap. Ukraine launched Storm Shadow cruise missiles manufactured by England and France against the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet right in the middle of a command meeting. At least 9 Russian officers were killed. There were generals among them. The historic building, a symbol of Russian naval power since the days of the Soviet Union, was left in ruins. Back in 2022, Ukrainian missiles had already sunk the cruiser Moskva, the most important ship in the Russian fleet. In 2023 and 2024, it was the turn of other ships and submarines to be hit inside their own ports. Planes destroyed on the runway, air defense systems wiped off the map. And at some point between 2024 and 2025, something happened that no one expected. The Black Sea Fleet, one of the oldest and most powerful fleets in the world, which Prince Potemkin founded in 1783, fled. It abandoned Sevastopol, the base that had served as home to the Russian Navy for more than 200 years. Russia pulled its ships back to Novorossiysk, on the other side of the Black Sea, in actual Russian territory. It was the first time in modern history that a navy was driven out of the sea by a country that didn't even have a navy. And this is where the story starts to get really disturbing for Russia, Because what you're about to understand isn't just about a peninsula. It's about how an invaded nation with far fewer resources than the invader is rewriting the rules of modern warfare. No nuclear submarines, no aircraft carriers, no United States military budget, just brains, patience, and drones. And that was just the beginning. We go back to June 3rd, 2025. 4:44 in the morning. The bridge over the Kerch Strait is 19 kilometers long. It's the longest bridge in Europe. And for Putin, it was more than just a bridge. It was a symbol. The physical proof that Crimea was now Russian forever.
Поехали. Путь.
In 2018, he made a point of inaugurating it himself by personally driving a Kamaz truck in front of cameras from all over the world. After 2022, that bridge became something else. It became the main artery supplying the Russian army in southern Ukraine. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, troops, everything passed through there. That's why it had already been attacked before. In October 2022, a truck bomb brought down parts of the roadway. In July 2023, maritime drones with 850 kilos of explosives each exploded under another pillar. The Russians repaired, reinforced, and armored it. They placed sonars in the water. They set up patrols, they put up protective nets, they thought they were safe. But Ukrainian intelligence, led by a man named Vasyl Malyuk, was already carrying out another operation, one that lasted for months. Ukrainian agents went into the water dozens of times in complete secrecy. They planted explosives directly on the underwater support pillars, pillar by pillar, charge by charge, without being detected. 1,100 kilos of TNT in total, the equivalent of a large aerial bomb, but divided into small pieces, hidden under the water, waiting for the signal. When the signal came on that 3rd of June, the bridge shook. The pillars were damaged, the structure cracked. Back in 2024, an agent of Ukrainian intelligence, identified only by the codename Hunter, had given a public warning. He said it clearly: the Crimean bridge is doomed. And on June 3rd, 2025, he proved he was serious. And what came after that, in 2026, proved that the bridge wasn't the only thing that was doomed. 2026. The war entered its 5th year. And in Crimea, something changed. The attacks stopped seeming like isolated events. They became a sequence, a chain of connected operations where each chosen target prepared the next one. April 5th, 2026. Ukrainian military intelligence launched a nighttime drone attack on a Russian ferry called Slavyansk. It may seem like an unimportant target, but it wasn't. The Slavyansk was the last railway ferry still operating in the Kerch Strait. The last one. It was the one carrying fuel, ammunition, and heavy equipment for the Russians in Crimea, whenever the bridge was overloaded or compromised. When the Slavyansk caught fire on the water, Russia lost its Plan B. 20 days later, April 26th, Sevastopol. In a single night, Ukrainian Special Forces commandos hit 3 warships at the same time. The landing ship Yamal, the Filchenkov, and the Ivan Kurs, an intelligence ship. At a nearby airbase called Belbek, they destroyed an elite Russian fighter jet on the runway, one of those that cost tens of millions of dollars. An advanced radar taken out. A naval training center hit, all in a single night. And it wasn't just in Sevastopol. A few weeks earlier, on the other side of the Black Sea in Novorossiysk, the Russian port where the Black Sea Fleet had taken refuge, Ukrainian drones had already attacked as well. The minesweeper Valentin Pikul was sunk. 2 frigates, which are large Russian warships, were damaged. The Russian submarines started doing something that no one had ever seen before. They started diving inside their own ports. Not to hide from the enemy at sea, to hide from drones that come from the sky. The Black Sea Fleet today is what military analysts call a ghost fleet. It exists on paper, but it can't go out anymore. It can't attack anymore. It can hardly defend anything anymore. And in the middle of the Kerch Strait, Putin's bridge is still standing. Wounded. Hastily repaired. Watched like never before, but with each passing day, more isolated. Every ferry destroyed, every ship sunk. Every base destroyed, every base hit tightens the siege. Crimea is turning into an island. And on an island surrounded by drones, no one survives for long. Now, to really understand the scale of what's happening, it's worth listening to what a man named Ben Hodges has to say. Hodges is a retired lieutenant general of the United States Army. He commanded all American forces in Europe. He spent almost 40 years in uniform. And since 2022, he has been repeating the same phrase in interviews, on podcasts, at military conferences. The phrase is this: Crimea is the decisive terrain in this war. For Hodges, everything that happens in Donetsk, in Luhansk, in Zaporizhia is important. But it's secondary. Because as long as Russia controls Crimea, Ukraine will never be safe. It will never be able to rebuild its economy. It will never be able to export grain through the Black Sea without Putin deciding from the peninsula to block its ports. Hodges said in 2025 very clearly, that bridge is gonna fall. For him, it's just a matter of time. And in 2026, he went even further. He said that Ukraine doesn't need to send ground troops to the peninsula yet. There's no need for a classic invasion. Only one thing is needed: to make Crimea untenable, impossible to defend, impossible to supply, impossible for Russian soldiers to live there. And, as you yourself have seen, that's exactly what's happening. Now think about what that means for Putin. Crimea was the greatest political victory of his administration. It was the foundation of all Russian propaganda for more than a decade. If Crimea falls, it's not just a peninsula that falls. The entire story that Putin tells the Russian people falls as well. The justification for the war falls. The most strategic military base that Russia has outside of Russia itself falls. And along with it falls the myth that Putin is the man who rebuilt the empire. That's why Russia is reinforcing its positions. That's why it's building reinforced shelters for airplanes in Belbek. That's why it's moving resources that are lacking elsewhere to try to hold the peninsula. But there's a problem. In March 2026, Russia lost more soldiers in a single month than in any other month since the beginning of the war. 35,000 soldiers killed or wounded. For the first time in almost 4 years, Russia is losing more soldiers than it can recruit. And that changes everything. Because an army that can't replenish itself can't defend two fronts at the same time. So the question remains, what do you think will happen? Will Russia be able to protect this bridge for much longer? Look, the truth is that nobody knows the date. Nobody knows the exact month. But the direction is clear. Even Russian military analysts, those who write on blogs linked to the Russian government, have already quietly admitted that something has changed. The bridge is still standing, but wounded. Repairs are becoming more and more frequent, and more expensive. Military experts agree on one thing: a fourth attack is just a matter of time. If it comes in the right form, with the right technology, at the right time, the bridge will fall. And when it falls, there's no way to rebuild it in the middle of a war. Not with Ukrainian drones watching the strait 24 hours a day. The ferries are already gone. The ships are hidden. The submarines dive in their own ports. The air bases are being reinforced with concrete, not to attack, but to survive. Meanwhile, inside Crimea, something quiet is starting to happen. The Russian soldiers serving on the peninsula are in a place that could, at any moment, be cut off from the world. Cut off from Russia. And when that happens, they'll be the last to know. In 2014, Putin took Crimea in 4 weeks with barely a shot fired. At that time, he believed he had conquered the peninsula forever, that he had rebuilt the empire, that he had redrawn the map of Europe. 12 years later, he is finding out how wrong he was. If this video helped you better understand what's happening in this war, leave a like down below. It makes all the difference for the channel to keep growing. And if you want to keep up with future analyses, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. We publish new content every week. Before you leave, tell me here in the comments. In your opinion, will Crimea return to Ukraine in 2026? Or will Putin still be able to hold on to the peninsula for a few more years? I want to read what you think. See you in the next video.